What happens when the rules of global cooperation suddenly seem disposable? When the institutions we've built to prevent chaos start to crumble under the weight of nationalist ambition? This week, we're back with Peter S. Goodman, New York Times global economic correspondent and author who's become a trusted voice in unraveling the complex tapestry of global economic and political shifts. In this episode, Peter returns to Pushback Talks to unpeel the layers of a world seemingly spinning into uncertainty. From trade wars that defy economic logic to the erosion of multilateral cooperation, we dive into the heart of how global power dynamics are being dramatically rewritten. Drawing from his deep understanding of globalization and economic policy, Peter offers a critical lens into how nationalist rhetoric and economic manipulation are reshaping our world. But beneath the chaos, there's a persistent thread of human resilience and the potential for collective resistance. Join us as we explore the intricate dance of global politics and economics and discuss connection as the most powerful form of resistance. This is Pushback Talks.
I'm Fredrik Leilani, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
And the advocate is up in Ottawa, Canada. I'm in Malmö, Sweden. I can see a blue sky. It's still freezing cold, but there's hope.
Hope.
And I know hope is a conflicted word, Leilani. Do you feel hopeful?
You know, someone recently asked me if the reason I get out of bed and sit at my desk day after day in this really mucky, horrible time is because I have hope. And I said flatly, no. I don't think hope is a motivator for me, but I think possibility is. There's possibility every day for something good, some difference.
Yeah.
Possibility.
I agree. I think it's, in some way, it's my duty to kind of tell people that we need to stay hopeful, and we don't have the right to take hope out of people. So we, in some way, we need to strengthen each other. So this will then be a hopeful podcast today, this episode. You don't know, but let's try. Let's try.
Possibly.
Possibly. In the film Breaking Social, we have Rutger Bregman, and he's a possibilist. He's not an optimist. He's a possibilist.
There we go.
And another participant in that film is now with us in our podcast, and that's Peter S. Goodman, the global economic correspondent of the New York Times. And it's nice to see you sit in front of a lot of books you've written, Peter. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's always great to be with you guys.
And the last time you were with us, it was, I have to show you, I have your book here, your last book, How the World Ran Out of Everything. It's an amazing, very interesting book.
Thank you.
And started off with a container crisis, but it's also a very deep understanding on how tariffs and trade changed the US and maybe also changed Sweden and Canada. So in some way, your work is now very relevant. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, there's certainly a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, how do I, and you, Leilani, how do we handle this overload of news being bombarded every day of confusing, horrible, aggressive behaviors? How do we handle it? How do we understand how to act in this and not only react? How do you do it, Peter? You're also a news consumer.
Yeah, look, it's very, very hard, and we are certainly being buffeted. I mean, every day, it seems like three things happen that in a normal time would take a month, to process. I mean, the idea that the United States has decided to treat both of its North American neighbors as the enemy. The fact that we're blowing up, 70 years of tradition in terms of seeing trade as a positive thing. I mean, trade has its issues. I've written about, we've discussed many of these issues. I mean, there are the reality of people who've been abandoned and who've been forsaken and who certainly haven't gotten their share of the bounty from globalization. That's a very real thing and something that has to be reckoned with. But it would be wrong wrong to conclude, from the fact that there are deindustrialized communities and people who've been left without job training, without health care, without support for housing. To conclude from that trade itself is bad would be a terrible mistake. But that's what we're living through at the same time that, in my own country, there's a war on the very concept of a system of law. Cooperation, in terms of government being a positive force, to say nothing of the continued war in the Middle East. There are so many ways in which we can be overwhelmed by what's unfolding. But I guess I look at it as, in the same way that it was foolhardy for Francis Fukuyama to famously come along and say, we're at the end of history when it seemed like liberal democracy was having its moment. It would be wrong to say we're at the end of history when now it seems as if the strong men have the upper hand and democracy seems extremely fragile.
Yeah. Leilani, how do you think about it? It is a strange time in history, of course, but this man and his friend, Mr. Musk, they're creating enemies everywhere. With Canada, with Mexico, with Latin America, with South Africa, with China, with Europe. It's like it's never ending. So how long can they run? Creating only enemies.
With Palestine, with any supporter of Palestine, with any Muslim, any Arab, whether they're a green card holder, citizen, who knows? It's. I'm trying to come up with a nice way to summarize how I feel. I think ultimately I feel assaulted constantly, both professionally and personally, and it's a hard time. As a Canadian who hates the winter, where do we look to, for better weather and for some of the most achingly beautiful spots on the planet? Just there in our backyard, the United States, Sedona is one of my absolute happy places. I was recently in this red rock mountain area, and it's just, it's breathtaking. And now I feel like that has been taken away from me. I don't feel like I can travel to the United States freely and with good heart and with good spirit. Not just, there's the issue for me. I have an Arab last name. I am pro-Palestinian and unabashedly so. And the liberation of Palestine really is what I'm not pro-Palestinian. I'm pro the liberation of the Palestinian people. And I don't want to have to hide that. And so there's just like that on that very personal level. I feel angry that I'm being denied just this normal relationship with my neighbors, And then on top of it, there is the deeply political aspects of this. I have a big piece on Gaza right now about recovery and reconstruction, which is a joke, of course. But nevertheless, it's part of my daily work life, and I feel there's so much happening. It's like having whiplash, And then even again, on the personal, we have a family business that's very much affected by these tariffs, and it just goes on and on. It is a remarkable time. And I really liked what Peter said, and I'll end here. I know I'm going on at length, but, in the 80s, I was young, a student, just graduating from high school, and free trade was the issue. And there were many of us who were really anti-free trade because we could see the writing on the wall that it was going to leave some people behind. And then came globalization, and there were many of us on the front lines, fighting that because we could see. So it's not that we don't have a healthy critique of the way economies are functioning now. We do. Many of us do. But gosh, isn't there a better, more constructive way to address the failings of our economies versus the approach Trump and his guys have taken? It's too bad, because I would love to see reform, for sure. I would love to see more industry back in Canada, back in the United States. Michigan, for example. But anyway, so that's from me. How about you, Fredrik? You're a consumer of news. Big time.
Yeah, now we're talking about two different things, but of course, the globalization has consequences, and which in that way, in some way, would say, okay, maybe Trump is right, with his critique. But then I remember reading your book, Peter, where Walmart, like the best friends of Trump, were lobbying to get China into the World Trade Organization, which then happened during Clinton. So it seems like it's the same forces that are now supporting Trump, who once upon a time made a good business out of producing stuff in China.
Well, the business crowd is the wild card in all of this, because I think a lot of business interests in the U.S. thought that Trump was basically bluffing on tariffs. The understanding, after the election, before the inauguration, before this trade war started, was that Trump was serious about so-called decoupling from China, right? Viewed China as the enemy, both in national security sense and in the sense of economic security, thought that it was a good idea for American companies to get out of China, for multinational companies to get out of China, does truly believe that the way to bring manufacturing back to the United States and employ more people is through tariffs, but that was mostly about China. And if you bought that frame, then Canada and Mexico in particular would logically be seen as part of the solution. You want to make less stuff in China, more stuff closer to home? Well, we have a trade agreement. By the way, it's a trade agreement that Donald Trump negotiated himself in his first term. He said it was the greatest trade agreement of all time, and it advanced the integration between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And I don't know these numbers for Canada, but I know them for Mexico. When Americans import a product from Mexico, somewhere between 30 and 40 cents on the dollar of the value of that product is made in the United States by American workers. And the counterpart number in China is like 3 cents on the dollar, and Chinese state policy is directed at driving that as close to zero as possible. So business interests assumed, we know what we're going to get from Trump. We're going to get tax cuts and deregulation, which the billionaire class loves, wealthy people love. That's going to make the stock market boom. Yeah, we're going to get a continuation of the decoupling, but the rest of the tariff stuff, it's all for show. It's a way for him to declare victory quickly. We saw this early on when he actually happened to take a trip to Colombia and was writing a story about this American medical supply company, MedSource Labs, that had moved production from China to Colombia, understanding that China was a risky place to continue to do business, assuming that Colombia would then get closer to home, shipping costs would be lower, they wouldn't have to worry about tariffs. And suddenly Trump, in I think his first week in office, threatens Colombia with 25% tariffs, demands that they accept deported plane loads full of deportees without any due process, gets the Colombian government to cave, although they didn't really cave. They just basically reiterated stuff they were already doing, which was the same template then applied by the Canadian government and the Mexican government in terms of getting delays on the threatened tariffs there. And so business thought that that's how the game was going to be played. But now there's enormous uncertainty. We've had these tariffs on steel and aluminum. A lot of that comes from Canada. We've had continued threats of across-the-board tariffs, and we've got real tariffs kicking in at 25% on many products coming from Canada and Mexico. And so business itself is worried. So anyway, a lot of business people who thought they were going to get a stock market rally and some bellicose rhetoric from Trump on trade now don't really know what to expect. And Trump's own people are saying, we're going to have short-term pain for longer-term gain. But a lot of economists say, no, we're going to have short-term pain for longer-term pain. And we've seen how trade wars play out, and it's never good. It might be good for a couple of protected industries. For most people, it lifts the price of consumer goods, which is especially bad. The further down the economic ladder you go, because poor people, they spend more of their income on things like groceries and clothing, and so it hits them hardest. So basically, the people Trump took office promising to lift. I mean, Trump came into office saying, I understand the struggles of blue-collar workers. The Democrats are now this out-of-touch corporate elite party. I hear you. I'm going to deal with inflation, and I'm going to bring jobs home. those people are now in line to get screwed. And that's all already beginning. And we don't know where this is going. And by the way, just to sort of put the finish on Leilani's broad thought about, hope versus possibility, the thing that's really striking to me as an American who's been thinking about globalization now for several decades is Trump's whole trade war in his first administration against China was premised on this idea that we're the good guys. We play by the rules. We have strong workplace safety standards and environmental regulations, and we're a democracy. And our industries are getting undercut by this job-killing Goliath. Now, in my book, I punch holes in this thesis and note that, to your point, Fredrik, that it was American business interests lobbying heavily to get into China precisely because they wanted the benefits of undercutting union labor and getting out from under environmental regulations. But this whole framing was, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, they've got naked power that they're using through their massive population and the heavy hand of government willing to crush any possibility of organized labor, which keeps wages low. And you can do deals transactionally. You want a piece of land, you just cut in the corrupt Communist Party boss in that area. You can get land, you can get resources. So you fast forward to now, Trump is now basically saying, openly, we, the United States, needs to be more like China. We're not going to have systems of rules. We've got, Elon Musk slashing the Environmental Protection Agency. We've got every conceivable kind of bureaucracy, some of which is directed at protecting working people from toxins and abuses. We're gutting these sorts of government undertakings, and we're saying to the rest of the world, hey, we're the biggest economy on earth, therefore you got to deal with us, and we're just going to do whatever we want, while Trump is himself cutting deals for his cronies. He's using his own Justice Department to go after his supposed enemies. I mean, we basically are operating much like the cartoonish depiction of China that prompted the trade war against China to begin with.
And you're totally right. And that's confusing and overwhelming. I'll always land with this. Okay, now you're making so many people angry and so many people afraid. So isn't that an amazing moment for a new kind of coalition between good people, good countries, good nations? I mean, we see Mexico has a decent government. Canada has a decent government. I mean, the European Union. There are a lot of interesting voices out there that are now talking about. I mean, you can also hear South Africa speaking out, and Brazil. And I guess also then inside the US, there are a lot of good people who say, okay, we need to do something. Isn't this a beautiful opportunity to create this kind of united front of the good people? How do you see it, Leilani or Peter?
I like to hear Peter's take on that and whether he's seeing that happening, at least even within the U.S. I can have a more zoomed out, what am I seeing or what am I not seeing? But I'm interested, is there kind of a rallying in the U.S. of pushback against this?
I mean, certainly there are a lot of people who are upset, but I think there is there's a lot of fear, really. I mean, in my own industry, I am fortunate to work for a newspaper that whatever you may think about any particular story or run of coverage or whatever your views may be, and there are lots of accusations about the New York Times, I can tell you, with complete sincerity that whatever we're doing, it's the product of somebody's journalistic judgment. It's not that some corporate interest is leaning on us to be friendly to them. It's not that we are friendly with some ideological wing of a party. Now, do we have values? Of course. Do individuals have values? Of course. I'm not here tap dancing about objectivity, which is a concept that I think most sensible people don't really believe in. There's fairness, there's professionalism. These things are real. There are facts, and we live in facts. But I'm not going to try to spin you that there's objectivity because I just don't think there's any such thing. But what I'm saying is our operation is pure in that the family running the ship truly believes in journalism, truly believes in independent journalism. That is increasingly not true of institutions that you could, I was fortunate enough to work for the Washington Post for 10 years under the Graham family. Jeff Bezos is very clearly afraid of Trump, afraid of what Trump could do to his space company, to his e-commerce empire, and is now using the Washington Post, at least from the opinion page standpoint, to be friendly to the Trump administration. You say the same thing about Facebook.
And producing a documentary of the First Lady for tons of money.
I mean, Amazon spending all this money on Melania's memoir. The optics of that are not good. The LA Times, under the hands of a billionaire biotech guy, Patrick Soon-Shiong, who was, basically lobbying for RF Kennedy Jr., to come in and pulling similar strings at the Los Angeles Times. So that's just in my neck of the woods, right? That's very disconcerting. But I mean, I think to answer your question more globally, what's happening is a reversal of decades of American policy during the period where Americans became concerned about China. Now, there's a lot to critique in the Obama administration trade policy, and I don't think it was particularly effective. But the logic was, hey, if we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, then let's join with the good guys. So let's trade more with Europe, let's trade more with Japan and South Korea, and we'll build these big regional trading blocks, and we'll force the Chinese system to be more like ours, to abide by workplace and environmental standards and pay higher wages and be more transparent and not steal intellectual property. And they'll have to do that in order to get into our club. And what's happening now is the rest of the world is forming its own club. So the result of sticking Canada, our neighbor to the north, with tariffs is Canadian business is going to look to Europe for more trade. And it's highly likely that the U.S. will find itself isolated in a trading block of its own creation. And by the way, I mean, one of the things that I think has been so disconcerting about all of this is the way in which this simplistic, nationalist, kind of sloganeering view of trade has saturated the popular culture. And I'll give you an example that comes to mind. I was in Louisville, Kentucky a few weeks ago doing a story about how local businesses were preparing for then the likelihood of the trade war. And I happened to take a tour of a bourbon distillery. And the bourbon industry was really unhappy because, and they were correct about this, they figured if we actually go through with these tariffs on the Europeans and on the Canadians, they're going to respond with retaliatory tariffs hitting immediately American spirits, and that's going to hit bourbon. So I wanted to go see that up close. So I'm taking this tour, and this kind of young hipster guy is showing us around this beautiful, handsome brick building in downtown Louisville. Angel's Envy. You may know this brand from your own liquor cabinet. And halfway through, he's saying, well, bourbon, 51% of it has to come from corn. The corn comes from a neighboring county. We get some barley, I think it is, from someplace in Ohio. And here's the rye that we get from Canada. Some guy behind me says, why do you buy the rye from Canada? And the tour guide says, well, they grow a lot of rye in Canada. It's good quality. It's close by. We get a good price. Well, how can you say it's American bourbon if you're getting rye from Canada? And the guy says, well, I mean, we're an American company. Like, here we are in America. We employ Americans. We're selling this stuff to Americans. Like, we're an American company. And I asked the tour guide afterwards, said, how often does that happen that you get that question? He said, 2 or 3 times a day. I mean, if we're at the point where we can't buy rye from our fellow democracy to the north, just a few miles over a border, and put it into our production without that somehow tainting the concept of the purity of the nation, like, what the hell are we doing? Like, how are we supposed to make anything? And, on that same trip, I visited a guy who makes pumps, 86-year-old pump company, sump pumps, industrial pumps. And I said, well, are you concerned about tariffs? He said, well, yeah. He said, we've been in business here for 86 years. He told me he had resisted the temptation to move production to China, to Mexico, because he's very proud to be a local company, keep the tradition going. He said, the problem is, we have this company that makes a part of our pump over in Canada. And if you stick me with 25% tariffs, that's going to be a real problem. And guess what? I'm going to lose business to competitors in places like China, because they're going to make their stuff cheaper. And I said, well, how do you understand the logic of this? These tariffs are supposed to bring production back to America. You're already here. And you've resisted the temptation to go somewhere else to chase cheaper wages. And he said, look, if I'm the bad guy in this, everybody's the bad guy.
Yeah. It's totally a big confusion for everybody who tried to operate, of course, in this world. Are they doing this because they are smart businessmen, or are this just driven by some crazy idea that they want to rock everything? It's hard to understand.
It is very hard to understand. The best I can come up with is that uncertainty is part of a strategy to make it so difficult to do business in the world that the only refuge, Trump keeps saying this, like, you're worried about tariffs? Make your stuff in the U.S. But the Louisville pump example shows, like, here's a company making stuff in the U.S. You just made them less competitive compared to their Chinese competitors. So it's very hard to square that rhetoric. But I think the policy is designed to make people anxious anywhere outside of the United States. And then I think that the policy is designed to centralize power. So, it's of a piece in terms of this transition from rule of law to rule of people. And if you are the president and you are demonstrating every day that it doesn't matter whether you yourself negotiated the trade agreement with your neighbors, you will breach that. And you will, cite obscure provisions of old laws to justify treating your neighbors like enemies, completely contravening, forget the World Trade Organization, your own trade agreement, then that puts every business on notice that you better ingratiate yourself with Donald Trump and his administration, which is how Melania gets the check for her memoirs from Amazon Prime. It's why people are buying, the Trump crypto coin. It's why people are writing giant checks to MAGA movement-related political action committees as a way to get an audience with Trump at Mar-a-Lago or wherever.
They pay $5 million to come and can have a lunch with him.
Right.
Yeah.
You are reinforcing the value of your decision-making and continually warning people that you could strike without any notice, without any rationality. So there's two ways to be safe: be friendly with MAGA and be in the United States. And this policy is consistent with that.
And be white and male. So much of this is also about, it seems, creating a hugely dominant class of white people, straight white males. Women may play some role in terms of procreation, I suppose. But if you look at the attack on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really clear, certainly as someone, I'm racialized, I'm 100% Arab, Canadian, it's really clear who's in and who's out. And the DEI stuff is so scary in certain ways. I saw a list. You don't know what's fake news these days. Maybe it was fake news. A list of words that the Trump administration doesn't want to see.
Yeah, I saw that too.
I don't know. Yeah, it was really long.
Yeah,
it included words like women.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. Is that
Equality.
fake news? Equality.
I'll tell you the low point for that, for me. Sorry, or did I cut you off?
No, please go.
Well, during the Super Bowl, I don't know if you guys watched the Super Bowl, people who don't care about football.
Only the halftime show.
Well, no, but that's my point. The halftime show. So Kendrick Lamar gives the halftime show. And on Twitter, I still can't say X, Elon Musk's social media platform, there's a lot of MAGA attacks on the halftime show as a DEI halftime show. Now, let us parse this. So if you are a dyed-in-the-wool racist, according to the stereotype, the one area where African Americans, get to have their moment is entertainers and athletes, right? That's the old demeaning, dehumanizing cliche, right? Oh, they're just entertainers and athletes. So here's Kendrick Lamar, a very successful entertainer at an enormous athletic show, and someone is saying that he has not earned his success. He's up there because of DEI. I mean, it's very hard to read that and not conclude that in the MAGA construction, any black person doing anything doesn't have value, doesn't have worth. I mean, is LeBron James a DEI basketball player? Like, I mean, how far are we going to go with this? Like,
exactly.
We're already there.
You know what I read the other day, and I haven't had time to do due diligence, but I read that all of the affordable housing programs in the U.S., there's that main one that enables private sector to work with community-based organizations, and they can create affordable housing because you don't have too much social housing in the States, that those programs fall under DEI because they are obviously aimed at providing housing for groups of people that fall into the DEI category, and therefore those programs are being scrapped.
That's incredible.
It's incredible. Like the sort of reach of this. And just to go back to Kendrick Lamar, he has won 22 Grammys. He won a Pulitzer for his album Damn. Anyway.
No, I mean, look, it's offensive enough that, black journalists, lawyers, doctors, poets, FAA regulators, like whatever, are
military personnel,
are having their competence and their achievements, questioned and undermined in a clearly racist way. Yeah. The idea that you're going to apply that to an internationally successful entertainer,
crazy.
It's unfathomable. Yeah. It's just unfathomable.
Yeah.
But friends, I mean, let's try to zoom out, because this is what happens inside the US, and you're in the midst of it, so of course it's overwhelming. But here from the outside, it's like, what the fuck is happening? We don't want to have anything to do with them. Yeah. And we have Europe, and of course, and when I meet people who are scared, I will tell them, hey, but it's a great moment also to identify who we can be friends with. We can look away from some differences or many differences, but we can still agree on many things. And so in some way, there is this possibility of something else coming up. And I mean, of course, that's a question. Where the global resistance to this weirdness, where will it come up? Of course, I mean, we can see resistance on the streets in Belgrade, or we can see it in many places around the world where people go take to the streets, also in the US. But of course, the European Union leaders or other leaders, the Canadians and the Mexicans, they don't speak out so much, that they do things behind the scenes.
Well, but are they? I mean, look at what the European Union just did recently, saying, that states should cut their spending in terms of overseas aid and should increase defense spending, a play that goes directly in the camp of Trump, to some degree. Look at Keir Starmer really taking that, head of England, really Prime Minister, I should say, taking, a huge chunk out of development aid and, really not turning to the people in his country and saying, okay, we've got to, shore up against this guy. And I don't know. I wish I could believe that states will rally all together and form some community against Trump. I don't know. I'm not seeing it.
I think it's happening in one way, but you will not see it spoken about at this point.
Okay. How?
I think that's at least my gut feeling that they need to talk to each other, because it's so aggressive. I mean, we on the other side of the water here, we have Denmark who are, being attacked. The small U.S. ally are being attacked.
Right.
I mean,
Crazy.
So everybody says, okay, fuck, we have lost a big friend. We still need to please them in some way, but. At the same time, we need to kind of talk to each other. We have to see, okay, the EU trade agreement with Latin America, I think went through. I mean, and I think they will certainly strengthen the relations to Canada, and so on. That's my.
I mean, our new prime minister.
Hope also.
Sure.
But I think it's also important to see. Okay, now you have a madman with his Musk at his side in the U.S., but we still have a world also with good people running countries, or trying, of course, to do the good things.
Well, I mean,
So do you mean I'm a naive Swede? That's my favorite role.
We have a new prime minister in Canada, Prime Minister Carney, for the next few days before he calls an election. And the first thing he did was he went to France to meet with Macron, whether we like this or not. It doesn't matter. It was very pointed. And then he met with the king. And now he's in northern Canada, in the Arctic. And so I think that was an interesting sign as this relationship building that you're talking about, Fredrik, these new relations.
Yeah.
It's especially interesting to me, given that I lived through living in London during Brexit. Carney, who was then the head of the Bank of England, was the guy who had to clean up the incredible mess of the uncertainty of the Brexit referendum back in June of 2016. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is that the people promoting Brexit, which was, again, before Trump's first election, it was the first sign, if you were looking at it right, of what happens when you allow inequality to fester, when you bail out bankers and screw working class and middle class people by cutting their benefits. And you have this, kind of racist, nationalist, taking back control language. And the people who are promoting Brexit said, well, this is great. We're going to get out from under the ossified European Union. We're going to forge our own, swashbuckling global adventure. We're going to return to our roots. And the colonialist trope was never, far below the surface. And the principal place they were looking is, we're going to get a great trade deal from Donald Trump. We're going to, instead of dealing with slow-growing Europe, we're going to have trade deals with fast-growing China and India and the United States. Well, now Britain is isolated from the European Union, which suddenly looks to be in healthier shape than Britain itself. And forget trade deals with Trump. You're dealing with trade war. And Carney, the guy who had to clean up the mess in England, is now in Canada having to deal with Trump much closer at hand. You just don't know how the story's going to go.
No, you don't. One thing my father said to me the other day I thought was super interesting. He said that he thought, now my father's 90, right? So he's been through a few things. He's seen a few things. And he said that if the U.S. wants to be kind of isolationist, which it apparently wants to be, right? Its own nation and everything should be U.S. made, et cetera, then they have to give up their power. Like, if they want to stop funding the UN, if they want to stop funding NATO, if they want to stop, footing the bill for a lot of things, which is what Trump is complaining about, whether it's, I don't know the veracity of his claims, but that's what he's claiming, then they have to recognize that with that actually comes a decrease in world power. And that I thought was super interesting. I mean, I don't know how we get there. I would love to see that.
But it's not isolationist. I mean, it's anti it's unilateralist, right? I mean, the idea of multilateral cooperation is over. I mean, isolationist is not, oh, we might go to Panama and take the canal back.
Right. True.
That we're going to take Greenland from the Danes.
Canada.
Right, Canada, the 51st state. Like, this is not isolationist. This is heavily interventionist.
Right. Manifest destiny.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly what we accused China of doing.
And what we accuse Russia of doing.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Fredrik, where's the hope? This hope you kept talking about? I'm not feeling very hopeful right now.
No, because you shut down my hope. I just opened my mouth
Where's
about
the possibility? Where's the possibility?
I mean, the possibility is of course, that the people Trump attacks and the people that are now feel uncertain and shaken are start to organize themselves. That could be world leaders from other countries. It could be business leaders from the US who are not so happy with this. Of course, we're talking about unions. We're talking about, everybody who lost their jobs right now. I mean, there must be tons of communities, and there are, of course, still also a lot of states, part of the United States, who are led by Democrats, who are also opposing what is happening. So
not much.
Not much.
Shut
down again. Boom, boom.
The Democratic Party is trying very hard to sort of stay out of. Look, James Carville, who was Clinton's famous strategist, his prescription was, let's just play dead and hope that Trumpism burns out. And I mean, there's a lot of look, Chuck Schumer just upset a lot of his own party. He's the leader of the Senate Democrats by going along with this resolution that actually emboldens Trump and Musk. I mean, hands them greater power to continue their federal government slashing in order to avoid a shutdown of the federal government. He thought that would be bad for the next election. I mean, there's still a very kind of narrow-minded focus on how do you win the next election. I am not, I wish I was, I am not seeing signs of something has gone terribly awry if this is where we are. And, what do we do about that? There's not a lot of that.
Yeah.
But of course, we are like 1 month or 2 months into his term. So of course, what is cooking now is maybe not up on the front yet. But I mean, something must happen because people can't eat all shit all the time. That's what I presume. Mm-hmm. But let's see. I mean,
I do think there will be some blows to his agenda, that he won't get his way with everything. I have been watching closely. Of course, I'm someone who suffers anxiety when the rule of law, as a lawyer and a human rights lawyer, when the rule of law is weakened and disobeyed, or I start really having panic attacks. I have to admit that. And I've been having some. That being said, some of the judges in the U.S. are holding strong and are, even if they are Republican appointed judges, there's something about the rule of law, right? Judges are not going to let go of the rule of law too easily, even if they're Republican, right? And so I think we're on the cusp of potentially some big pushback from the courts in the U.S. I think that will serve a blow. I think Canada has served a blow to Trump. I mean, the aggressive stance taken by the Premier of Ontario saying, okay, we're going to tax your energy by 25%. And all the states that border the province of Ontario are going to be affected.
I'm sitting in one of those states.
Yeah, exactly. And then he's like,
personally close to home.
And you know what? If we have to, we're going to cut it off. And when he said that, he got a meeting with Rubio or whoever it was. Maybe. So I think if we can get some more blows, people will start being a little less fearful, maybe, and maybe come together more. I don't know. I mean, I'm not seeing it in my sector yet. All of us are just like, whoa, what is happening here? And scrambling and, decrying racism against Palestinians and their supporters. I mean, right? Like it's a kind of madness right now. But as you say, Fredrik, it's month 2.
Yeah. And Tesla is losing a lot of its business over here, Peter.
And here too.
And here, in the US too.
Yeah.
So, is there any point where Musk will say this is too much, or he doesn't really care? Or
there is a growing sense that he doesn't care that much about Tesla.
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I apologize. I got to run.
Oh yeah, the time's up.
But this was great, and I really appreciate you guys hashing all this out. It's great to see you.
You are a great inspiration, Peter.
Yes.
Can we stay possible? Can we agree on that?
You bet.
Let's stay possible. Thanks so much, Peter.
Bye-bye. Wow, Leilani. Peter is a big inspiration.
He's amazing. His analysis is great and his knowledge is great, which is helpful, right? As we're thinking this through and finding our way.
I think knowledge is important, and I think we become stronger when we have the arguments, even if I was trying to get some hope and I was shut down over and over again.
No, but your idea is right, Fredrik. Your idea is 100% right, that we have to, that there has to be a big coming together of sorts, both like in our own nations, but also internationally. So it's not that I don't see that as where we need to go. I just think everything is so destabilized right now. People are really, well, I just speak for myself. I'm totally suffering. I told you in a WhatsApp, right? I can barely sustain a good mood for more than a couple of hours. The world is really shitty. Both you and I have, young adults, children, and we're thinking, I'm thinking, what kind of a world is this for young people?
That's why we have the podcast. This is the Pushback Talks, and it's a leading resistance podcast. Tell your friends about to resist and get some inspiration.
Yeah.
And tell your friends about the podcast and send it on to your friends and subscribe to it and comment on wherever you listen. That's a way of supporting the podcast, isn't it?
It is. And people can also go to patreon.com, look up Pushback Talks, and send us a little love by money. It helps.
I think it's more important than ever to look around you and see who are your friends.
That's right.
Who are doing cool stuff. Let's support people who do cool stuff and don't shoot down their hopes.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I find that in my day-to-day. I'm, seeing all sorts of small groups that are struggling and they're asking for a little money, and I'm broke now because I just keep giving because it's so important, all this resistance. You're right, Fredrik.
Yeah. So this is the way how we can move on, is to support each other and also try to look out for good people doing cool stuff. And I think that's what we can try to do also in this podcast.
Yeah. I want to say one more thing. I really want people to support documentary filmmaking. I said it in one of our recent episodes. I'm going to say it again. It is such an important vehicle for change. I went on this weekend to 2 documentary films, one of which is No Other Land, and which I'd already seen, but I wanted to support it again. But there's so many good documentaries out there telling truth, exposing things, and really they can be big sources of motivation. So Fredrik's made a few, folks. You can look them up. WG Film, Breaking Social, his most recent, .com, well, if they Google WG Film, they'll find you. Breaking Social, his most recent film, really, really inspiring.
Also featuring Peter S. Goodman.
That's right.
So, but that film is, I think it's more relevant than ever because it speaks about kleptocracy, and the rule of the kleptocrats, which now actually took over the government more openly in the United States. Even if the kleptocrats has been close or are close to governments in many, many countries, this is like the most open operation we've seen. But the film also talks about hope, and it also talks about who we are as human beings, that we are born to cooperate. The human race is born to work together, and that's how we survived and thrived as a species. So I think it's important to remember that. And there are a lot of people out there, also in the US, in Canada, Sweden, who work together in communities or in small groups who want to do stuff. And let's keep doing that. Thank you, Leilani.
Thanks, Fredrik.
Nice to see you. Now I can see your smile again. I like that. That's good. You have a beautiful smile. Keep it up.
Yeah. Every 2 hours or so, there's a smile.
Yeah. Take care and see you soon.
Bye, Fredrik.
Bye, Leilani.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.